Winning at least 20 games in a single season is considered to be a good sign that a starting pitcher had a dominant performance that year. Having multiple 20-win seasons then becomes a good sign that a pitcher is having a dominant career. With the Fall Stars program in MLB The Show 22, we were given a 20-game winner milestone of a Yankee legend and Hall of Famer, Whitey Ford, for his first 20-win season in 1961. Ford might not be a boss in this program, but just like Luca Brasi, Jaws, and Starscream, sometimes the henchmen are just so cool that their story deserves to be told. Welcome to the first episode of Behind the Boss. Okay, so I'm just going to be honest with you straight up here. Despite his card glorifying his league-leading 25 wins in the 1961 season, this video is instead going to talk about one of the 4 losses Whitey Ford got that season. In particular, April 11th, 1961, the very first game of not just his season, not just the Yankees season, but the very first game for the first season of the Minnesota Twins franchise. Ford was the Yankees' go-to guy for their home openers, with a proven track record. Slick had won 5 of the last 6 Yankee home openers dating back to 1955. The matchup of taking on the newly moved franchise of the Minnesota Twins should not have been a concern for the dominant New York Yankee squad. Previously known as the Washington Senators, under the ownership of the Griffith family, the franchise in the capital city was mainly known for 2 things: cheap as hell ownership and being terrible almost every single year. After winning the World Series in 1924 and then losing it the next year, the Senators would have one more postseason appearance until their move to Minnesota in the 1960s. The old saying coined by famed baseball writer Charles Dryden was, "Washington, first in war, first in peace, and last in the American League." After a 5th place finish in 1960 and only attracting around 745,000 visitors to the 77 home games at Griffith Stadium in Washington, D.C., nephew son of the stadium's namesake, Calvin Griffith, finalized the relocation of the Senators to Minnesota in time for the 1961 season. Even though he had just moved his Washington Senators to the Midwest, the newly added MLB expansion team of the Washington Senators, not under the ownership of anyone named Griffith, continued to play at Griffith Stadium for the 1961 season before moving to the District of Columbia Stadium the year after. The final baseball game at Griffith Stadium was played on September 21st, 1961, before a crowd of only 1,498 fans. In a comic sign from the baseball gods above, the matchup was the Washington Senators taking on the Minnesota Twins. With a brand new multi-use complex in the DC area, Griffith Stadium was empty, abandoned, and being used as a parking lot within a year of the second Senators departing. By 1964, the property was sold to a nearby tenant, and in 1965, the ballpark was torn down and replaced. Okay, back to Whitey and April 1961. While the 1960 Yankees made it to Game 7 of the World Series, only to lose to the Pirates with a Bill Mazeroski walk-off home run, they replaced the legendary 7-ring rocking skipper of Casey Stengel with the hot new coaching prospect, Ralph Houck. In the 1960 series, Ford was overlooked in the opening game, pitching in games 3 and 6, a move which Stengel was widely criticized for when the Yankees gave up 10 runs in their Game 7 loss. On the plane ride home from Pittsburgh, it was said that Ford was never more angry at his manager than at that point, not speaking to him at all. 5 days after Game 7, on October 18th, Stengel and Yankee co-owner Dan Topping sat at a press conference together, quite unprepared for the questions they were about to be asked. Topping dodged questions about whether Casey had been fired before Stengel grabbed the microphone and bluntly stated, "Quit, fired, whatever you please, I don't care." After Stengel ran into the press corps and then had a quick stop at the bar, the press conference got back on track. Panicking with the let-loose manager next to him, Topping then claimed Stengel was being terminated because of his older age and strongly denied that the World Series situation had an effect on this decision. Before the start of the '61 season, Whitey Ford and his new manager Houck ran into each other during a college basketball game at Madison Square Garden, where the new skipper asked Whitey if he was open to the idea of pitching every 4 days over the 5-day rotation that was in place under Stengel. Ford was immediately open to the idea and saw it as his way to finally reach the milestone of 20 wins. From the Game 7 prior to the home opener of 1961, the Yankees lineup was almost a copy-paste selection from the year before, aka stacked as fuck. The only real change was Yogi Berra returning to catcher, and replacing him in left field was now Hector What-A-Pair on the Panama Clipper Lopez. Along with the new team identity, the Twins had crafted a new infield for themselves with the craft root beer mogul himself, Harmon Killebrew, moving across the diamond from first to third. On the mound for Minnesota that day, for the first time in the new franchise's history, is the man who is going to be the main focus for the rest of this video today, Pedro Ramos. Ramos was born April 28, 1935 in Pinar del Rio, Cuba, a western part of the island known as the Mecca of tobacco. Pedro stood out as a young player in his part of Cuba. As a teen, he eventually caught the eye of the famous Washington scout, Papa Joe Cambria, who signed the 17-year-old for a $150 bonus. Still a teenager, Ramos was brought over to the United States and put on a bus destined for his first minor league assignment. Playing ball in a small town with a fellow Spanish-speaking minor leaguer, Ramos asked his compadre, "So, this is Texas?" In response, the player replied back to Pedro, "This is Tennessee." In the midst of the Senators' yearly tradition of being total ass, Ramos was brought up to the majors in 1955 at the age of 20. Pedro put up bad numbers, but even in his own words, the cheap owners limited his ability to have success on the mound. From the eye tests of the time, he was a fireballer with a tendency for giving up home runs, but surprisingly was also known as one of the fastest sprinters in the entire league, sometimes even being put in as a pinch runner. Before coming to the States, Ramos spoke no English but was familiar with some parts of the American world through the radio broadcasts his family got in Cuba. Once in America, Pedro began to learn about his new home and embrace different parts of the 1950s culture. Pedro loved movies, in particular, Western movies. And it is from here that I introduce to us why Pedro is the focus of today's video. Pedro has incredible nicknames. First off, he was known as the Cuban Cowboy. Ramos's love for Western films became so strong, he began to wear a getup to match. not just a cowboy hat and some boots, but the full regalia with sparkling embroidered shirts and chaps to match. We return back to April 11, 1961. We are inside the visiting team's clubhouse at Yankee Stadium. The newly christened Minnesota Twins are getting ready for their season opener. 2022 Baseball Hall of Fame inductee Jim Kaat remembers this moment in detail. Pedro's walked in the clubhouse in a full cowboy outfit and with guns in 2 holsters. He pulled a gun out and was waving it around, and Bob Allison went nuts, telling him to put it away. Couldn't blame Bob, because with Pedro, those guns might have been loaded. This brings us to Pedro's other nickname, Pistola Pete Ramos. This was not and will not be a one-off instance in his life of Pedro being armed with not just 1, but 2 loaded handguns. After changing out of his cowboy outfit and hopefully finding a secure place to put his loaded weapons, Ramos began to warm up as he took on the returning American League champions. Next to Western movies, Ramos's biggest idol in life was the Yankee center field legend himself, Mickey Mantle. He loved Mickey Mantle and would always challenge the Mick to a foot race, never having the invitation accepted. For both of their careers, Mickey will hit a total of 12 home runs off of Ramos, the most he will give up to any one batter, and the second most Mantle will hit off any single pitcher. One Ramos Mantle home run lives on in the mists of lore and legend when on May 30th, 1956, in the first game of a doubleheader between the Senators and Yankees, Mantle took a pitch from the cowboy himself and launched it to the topmost facade of Yankee Stadium, said to be 370 feet away and over 117 feet in the air. Estimates on the exact trajectory of the home run and distance are still debated, but some people put it at over 600 feet. The ball Mantle hit that day off of Ramos would be then sold for over $125,000 at auction in 2013. People did not expect much out of the Twins that day, and especially not from Pistola Pete. This should be an easy win not only for the Bronx Bombers, but for the first victory on Whitey Ford's campaign to finally winning 20 games. Through 6 innings, both teams were scoreless in a pitcher's duel. Pedro so far had only let up 3 singles. Then, in the top of the 7th, Bob, gun safety expert Allison, started off the inning hitting a home run down the left field line. In the next at-bat, catcher Earl Batty hit a double into left field. Third baseman Reno Bertoria then walked to have 2 men on. After a sacrifice bunt to advance the runners, Pistola Pete Ramos himself strolled into the batter's box. When he got a bat to the ball, Ramos could bring some power. The only problem was, he was terrible at that. In a career 770 plate appearances, Ramos struck out 316 times, or 41% of his at-bats. This should be an easy second out for Ford. Instead, Ramos hit a ball between the infield and Mickey Mantle in center. With the perfectly executed hit and run pulled off, both Batty and Bertoria came in around home and scored, pushing the Twins' lead to 3. With this, Whitey Ford was done for the day and pulled from the game, with the losing decision still potentially up for him. After this late game rally, Ramos was the man who iced out the Yankees for the win. Over the last 3 innings, Ramos was perfect against the 9 batters he faced. With Mickey Mantle's flyout to right field in the 9th, Ramos had done it. He had blanked one of the greatest squads in baseball history. Mickey Mantle and the ex-Fargo Moorhead Twin legend Roger Maris went a combined 0 for 7 with 3 strikeouts. The final score of the game was Minnesota 6, New York 0. Pedro was ecstatic over his victory. Vying for the same milestone as his opponent on the mound, Ramos said to the press, "I got number 1 today. For the first time, I think I'll win 20. Watch me." By the end of the 1961 season, Pedro was right about having 20 among his stats. He was just wrong about which one it was. He would end up with an 11-20 record. Whitey Ford, though, would have just the opposite season. By the All-Star break, his record was already sitting at 16-2, eventually adding on 9 more wins and a pair of losses to bring his record to 25-4. He won the Cy Young Award for his performance that year, and the Yankees would go on to win the World Series that year under their new manager. In terrible timing, Ford's electric season in 1961 is often overshadowed by the historic home run chase that happened that same season between his Yankee teammates Roger Maris and Mickey Mantle. But still, Ford's milestone still stands to this day, digitally memorized within the bounds of MLB The Show. Now, when will they add Pedro Ramos to the game is the next great question we must discuss. Thank you so much for watching the very first episode of Behind the Boss. Ramos' story is a crazy one. I know I just only briefly touched on him, but after this moment in 1961, he is a fascinating thing, and he's still around. If you enjoyed it today, please like, comment, subscribe, and share. I always love to see that there. And if you have any feedback, I would love to see it there in the comments. I plan on having more consistent and regular content being published here on the channel relating to baseball history and fun little things like that. So again, if you enjoyed it, please share. In the famous words of Casey Stengel, quit, fired, whatever you please. I don't care.